I'd like to give you our perspective on this whole area. And for us, fundamentally, it comes from literally talking, pitching, working with hundreds of different marketeers in different sectors worldwide. And what I'd like to just really make a big point of is that whilst we're talking about digital attribution, we're talking about accelerating that, we're talking about getting a much finer read on what people are doing, consumers are responding to in terms of digital channels, we have to put that in perspective. And what I'm saying here, and I think what we're having told to us and what we're dealing with is really clients saying that we have to go beyond this silo that seems to have happened. And we talk about silos in data because the size of data is just huge to deal with quite often. And it's convenient to optimize within each of these data sets or these areas and sometimes lose that perspective. So fundamentally, there are 5 things that we believe clients are really asking for and we're delivering. And I'm going to take you through a few stories, a few anecdotes and a few charts, if you want to bear with me for the next 15, 20 minutes, that really illustrate this from our perspective. What we feel is that there's 5 areas. One is clients are demanding, and internally there's a demand, from the clients that we deal with, the marketing, the brand side of clients, to really understand the holistic nature of commercial activities in a company. Not just look at media marketing tactics in and of themselves, but look at all of the things that the company is doing to drive traffic and conversion. And I think that holistic approach that we like to call commercial effectiveness is beyond just marketing or media mix modeling. It's very much bigger than that. And at the same time, that sort of top level we need to get much more effective at. We also, we're finding that we also need obviously to get much better at the bottoms up. So we really need to understand attribution, but in the context again of everything that's happening around those digital channels. So we need to understand those cross-channel effects much more effectively. We need to understand that when you have paid search, it's not just delivering a direct attribution, it's got direct effect, but it's also got indirect effect on lots of other channels of conversion. And in turn, not all of that revenue obviously is incremental, so we need to understand that as well. Thirdly, what we're finding is that clients also, whilst they're saying we want to be top down in terms of an overall picture of the business, we also need to look over time as well, and I think that's been lost a little bit so far today, if I may say, is that clients aren't just looking at that 13-week window, they're needing to look over years. And I think there was a really good point earlier in one of the sessions where we were starting to talk about brand and equity. Without getting into the whole debate, it's really important to have that perspective, and our clients are really asking us to do that, and that's what we're delivering for them, looking at long-term as well as short-term. And the irony, or I suppose not so much an irony, but it is certainly something to bear in mind, is that quite often taking that approach reinforces the power of the new digital channels that we have that clients are facing. It actually encourages clients to spend more money. And I think it's fair to say that a lot of the techniques that we've honed, ourselves, competitors and clients themselves in this whole area may have started as consumer models, but we're very much cognizant of the fact that using them, we're driving revenue and we're driving business through digital media channels as well and offline. I mean, it's really important to understand how all of those elements of the mix, work together. The fourth element I think is probably obvious, but it's certainly important to bear in mind as well. And again, came out of a point earlier, which is getting inside the planning cycle of marketers is really critical. Being rapid with the results. So not just delivering great detailed insights, but also making sure that they're just in time within the planning cycle of our companies that we work with to make sure that they can action those results and get them into the business. I think that's absolutely critical. And the fifth point, which I won't labour, but is really important, and I think just came up now, this whole area, and I'm not knocking it because I think we do our best to promote proprietary technologies and approaches, but it's really important to look beyond the shiny new object thing and actually say, can you be transparent? Can you really take me through how these models are created? I think the educational side of it is really important because modeling itself is a series of hypotheses that you're testing. And at the true source of it, we need to understand what those assumptions are that we're then testing against the data. So I think that's very, very critical as well. The experience so far as the business has always been the fact that marketers have been wanting to understand how much they get for their dollar spent. It's pretty obvious that I think that's a fundamental, process that needs to go on. And for some brands that are on a real roll and it's pretty obvious that when they spend money, they get a return, then that's fine. But even for those clients, they really need to learn from the past. And marketing mix modeling, historically, over the last 30 odd years, has been really important in driving that accountability and that effectiveness. And I think it's actually gone a long way. I know people can look at the criticism of it, that it's maybe looked at things a little bit too short term, but I think we're addressing that now in a big way. What it does do is give our marketeer clients, fundamentally, the ammunition that they need internally to show the impact on the bottom line, and not have this, oh, well, okay, that's the branding side of it, or that's the marketing side of it. It's really important to see marketing through a commercial lens, and I think mixed modeling's done that. As the industry is obviously engaged with digital channels, digital attribution itself has become much more prevalent. But, the point to make here is that this is only just one piece of the measurement puzzle. And on its own, it's not enough. I think it's fair to say, and from the debate this morning, that there's a confusion in terms of, in the industry overall, in terms of ROI measurement, proper techniques, activation, as it relates to paid, owned and earned through digital and social media. And an awful lot of the channels that consumers are responding to aren't in anyone's control, Understanding how that organic, social behaviour is really affecting the brand is really critical. We work with a lot of clients that spend a fortune in assets, sponsorship, celebrity assets. And how you value that, how you bring that in is a very big part of what we're working to do as well. You have to go beyond just looking at that narrow conversion window that everybody conveniently looks at and says, that's digital attribution. There's a number of challenges, and maybe I'm being controversial, so that's fine. I think it's good to step that up a little bit, I think. The point is that standardization of metrics is an issue. It eludes many organizations, both internally in terms of what they mean by accountability, effectiveness, ROI, but also in a much wider way. Often there's more data, but sometimes that means less clarity. I really do think that quite often silo-based point-in-time analytics in any form have really led to us leaving a lot of money on the table there and mis-optimizing. And I think the point the panelists made earlier was really good, which was, being able to use your own commercial judgment and take the numbers and understand that in the context of what the parameters were for the models, what the scope is, whether they really looked at internal or external base effects, macro effects and everything else. It's really important to know that. And I think because it's so complex, and because we talk about big data, we talk about smart data, because it is a complex area and there's a lot of debate and a lot of discussion going on, there's therefore an over-reliance on pure conversion-based measurement. Most clients who are looking in this whole area of attribution are using an attribution metric which is last click, because it's flawed, but we know it's flawed, as opposed to taking something else which they're not quite sure of. And again, we as an industry need to go much further and actually breaking down that and being more transparent, that fifth point that I mentioned earlier. The thing I would like to say is that really, there's a danger of undermining long-term strategy and demand creation activities if you just focus on that lower funnel conversion side of it. And I think we should all be aware of that. And I'm not saying that that's not important, and it's very important to collaborate. Most of our clients have used a range of different tools and techniques internally and externally. That collaboration, that transparency is really, really critical. I would say, this is our fundamental problem. We've got marketing mix modeling, we've got digital attribution, we've got customer analytics, and they're all pretty good. They're all pretty advanced. We've got great people working on them internally at clients, external vendors, and they're not basically joining up. To join up those dots is eluding an awful lot of the clients that we talk to. And we do our best, and we work very hard to ensure that we're trying to integrate those areas. And it's really important, I think, from our perspective, if I'm going to give that, is that's the breakthrough, I think, from our point of view, is it's less about individual brilliance in technique and much more about linking that up to a commercial viewpoint and insight that the client can enact and get value from over time. As an example here, a national US retailer that we worked with for a number of years, a couple of years back, had a fundamental problem. They had traffic doing pretty well for themselves. They had really good test scores on the creative in both digital and offline channels. And their promo strategy had been optimized. They'd done tests, store tests. And yet they're having a real problem on sales. Sales were a very big issue in terms of actually, sales growth. It was getting into negative, and they didn't really understand why. Now, working with them and actually broadening the remit of all the data that we've been using before, looking at the operational side of the business much more, going out of our way to talk to the stakeholders who aren't normally part of a marketing mix or digital attribution discussion, we found data that would allow us to understand what was happening in store, what was happening on that traffic and how that was or wasn't being converted. And what we found there, and what we could prove, is that it was a reduction in headcount on experienced managers, it was a lack of or a poor onboarding training program that were causing the big issues. And I think fundamentally, like a lot of businesses, it's often things like staffing, reformats, in-store activities that count much more than media. If you're looking at pharma, it's the sales force optimization. It's not necessarily D2C measurement that you're going to be looking at. You need to take that wider perspective if you're going to get through to actually understand what's really driving commercial success. I won't show too many charts, but this is one I wanted to just to put out as an example. If you look at a due to, and this is 16 over 15 for a particular client, we've got sales growth of almost 8%. Now, if we were just looking in that window of digital attribution, then fine. We look at online channels, paid search in particular here, doing extremely well. Maybe some of that is misattributed because you've got, organic search doing more poorly, but overall online, could account for all of that growth. However, it's a mixed message. You have to look at where offline channels have been performing. In this case, there's an issue on television potentially. You look at where D2C is. You look at the performance of the email, and valuable customer program that was doing really, really well. But also things like internal and external base effects. So markdown, range options. You have to look at things like the weather and competitor effects. I mean, this isn't new news, but it is important when we think about this whole debate that whilst we're looking at precise measurement and sub-channel optimization on digital, as important as that is to do that at the cookie and the ID, device ID level, you need to see that in perspective of the wider piece here. You really have to understand that because you need to know when you're advising clients as to where the overall monies are going. And that's really the main thing that we've found in terms of driving success for clients in terms of marketing investment. The other thing I wanted to point out was long-term. Quite often, and it's fair to say the mixed industry, and I've been involved in it for a very long time, and a lot of media agencies actually, as well as independent consultancies, but the importance of long-term has never been more important. When we talk to brand owners in particular, but brand owner retailers, they're doing an awful lot of money. The likes of Adidas is spending more on assets, commercial sporting assets than it is on media. All right, so you can't go in and even do mix modeling or marketing mix modeling and look at a 13-week window and go, well, that's your markdown effect, that's your, co-pay in sort of wholesale and do that optimization without considering the value of the assets that they have and how they're driving effectiveness as well. And a particular client that we're working with is a luxury brand retailer, working globally, 20-odd markets. And what they have is a huge bucket of money into PR, events, long-term holdings on outdoor magazines, because they're a fashion retailer and brand owner. How do you value all of that if you're looking at it just on a short-term basis? So we worked with them, and without doing hugely extensive equity modeling, we took their brand tracking data and incorporated that so we could tell them what the long-term brand impacts are. So just as people talk about, diminishing returns on short-term ROI, we're also talking about long-term and giving them a planning process that allows them to look at what they're doing in the longer term over 12 months or more, as well as the short term, and harmonizing both aspects of the plan. And I think that's really important for them. Last couple of years, you're talking about an incremental $50 million to the bottom line because of that type of optimization. So there's a great opportunity, and I think this, in a broader sense, for the industry, is a broader opportunity to engage and to understand and to keep mentioning that context. It's really important that clients see it as part of the solution, that you get a truly integrated approach, that you work with other people, other parties perhaps, but certainly internally you're engaging as many stakeholders as possible in client businesses to show the true value of what digital marketing overall is delivering to the business, to the bottom line. We call this, from our end, full customer attribution. It's about trying to deliver and delivering in practice a complete net attribution analysis. Taking into regard digital, offline channels, taking full account of those operational and macro factors, really providing a complete view of commercial effectiveness. So by all means, we're taking in cookie and ID level, we're doing a very detailed attribution, but that is only step one. What we're also looking most fundamentally is, how that is driving both web and store sales, so bricks and mortar as well as e-commerce, not just one or the other. You can't just look at it as a closed loop here. And also, most importantly, looking at it from the top down and saying, well, look, all of these different drivers of the business are interacting. What are those cross-channel effects? What does paid search do in terms of driving response to display banner advertising, actually? What are the halo effects? What are the cross-channel effects? It's really important to do this level of sophisticated modeling. I mean, we built out data platform, but we've also built out a modeling platform that can react in that rapid scale. Because it may not be real time that clients are after, but it is a rapid modeling platform that you need to be delivering to clients to allow them to do that. And for nearly all of our clients, it's then taking that down to customer segments, which could be hundreds across DMAs in the US in particular. And what this approach really, really enables is to look at a sub-channel level, not just at what's driving your e-commerce business, as you would typically have on a digital platform, but also looking at the bricks and mortar side, but knowing that this is actually taking account of all of those halo effects of all the other marketing tactics and media tactics that the client's actually running. So in this case, it could be one particular campaign, paid campaign on Facebook is producing much greater results for D2C or for wholesale on e-commerce, but also the client can see in aggregate how they're driving D2C and wholesale in terms of bricks and mortar. And what's the fascinating thing here is that the nuances of how people think about digital is changing. Social video, in this case, the YouTube work that they were doing is having much more impact as a sort of middle or upper funnel activity in terms of brand driving, in terms of bricks and mortar than it is on e-commerce. Conversely, Twitter is the opposite. And this is the sort of pattern of difference that you'll find when you look at this level, when you take into account all of those sort of operational factors. To give you an example, and this is the most complex chart, so I do apologise, and hopefully you won't be able to read all of the numbers, but you can see the sense of what we're doing here. What we're trying to do is take what we would typically call digital attribution direct channel effect here, which this particular client is $371 million, so that's quite a large amount. And then we're really looking at, essentially the incremental value of that. So let's just take off the stuff that would have happened without any activity in paid search. And then, once we have that net figure, that grey figure of $327 million, what is that activity doing to drive response through these other channels as well? That's the only way to get a really true picture, a true view of what's happening in digital, but also looking at the offline and how that's driving this as well. And more often than not, you're finding that the net attribution here is really driving an awful lot more response than even the client realised just looking at the direct figures, the last click figures or whatever else they used before. 29% in this particular example, but we can show many more where that is the case. And that's really getting them to think much more about that performance media campaign work, because quite often in clients, search is over here. They're doing their own thing. But here it shows how the linkage works to the overall business, how they can be smarter in making sure that optimization works. And I think the panel before mentioned creative. What's the lovely thing about this, and when you're working at such a detailed level, is that creative impact is actually very easy to measure at a campaign level, especially, and looking at it by category is really important. So what does that actually mean? Well, it means return, right? And for us, this is a great example that we've used, internally, is that in working with this global apparel company over the last few years, we've seen a dramatic increase in the amount of money that they're getting in terms of savings from their marketing activity, but critically it's giving them the confidence to invest more. So we're talking about double the revenue from marketing activity for this particular client over just 3 years, which is a huge amount. And that's coming from very smart optimization, but in a holistic way, looking at a digital level, looking at operational level, and linking all of that back up. And what's nice here is that 2/3 of that has come from optimization ROI improvements, but the other part, the other third is really coming from them spending more money and having the confidence to do that. So I think the response before in terms of, marketing mix modeling being much more of a consumer focus initially is actually a fundamental way forward to actually ensure that clients are spending more money in the area that we're in. Thank you very much.